Logical fallacies. It's the kind of stuff people say when they run out of smart things to say. If you can't recognize BS when it's offered to you, you might just buy into it. That's what logical fallacies are. Nonsense logic pretending to be actual logic. I'm not saying that people who use logical fallacies are knowingly trying to put one over on you. They may just be using the kind of so-called logic they were raised with. But a smart consumer of knowledge will recognize nonsense when they see it and will avoid using it at all times. There are so many logical fallacies that a video would take too long to produce in one session. Let me hit the high points of some of the more common fallacies. This is the proverbial, if all your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? Argument. It also explains all of junior high fashion decisions. We do things because other people do it, and we are convincing ourselves or others that we are correct for doing it for that very reason. Circular logic, which is wrong, by the way. I do it because everyone else does it, and they do it because I'm doing it too. It's absolutely ridiculous. Ad hominem is Latin for attack the man, and therefore there are several kinds of attacks. This is the abusive kind. Now, I'm using some sort of shorthand here to make the argument easier to break down. The claim of P could be anything that person A states. It's when person B doesn't actually have a good rebuttal to that statement or can't think like an adult that they just insult the speaker A. It's childish. It's name calling, and we see it way too much in political circles. Don't fall for this. Demand that person B actually refute the claim that person A made, not resort to name calling. This kind of ad hominem attack is guilt by association. It's the, well, Hitler did it, so that idea is a bad kind of argument. It's also sometimes called a genetic argument or genetic fallacy. When I see this kind of argument, I always like to note that Hitler also wore pants. And so, using their style of logic, if you are wearing pants, then you must also hate the Jews, want to start a war, kill yourself with your girlfriend, whatever. Just because someone who is very bad had an idea or did an action does not make everything that person did wrong. Wearing pants is a glorious idea, no matter that Hitler did it too. Speaking of Hitler did it too, here's another Latin term, tu quoque, meaning, well, you too. It's denying an argument because the speaker seems hypocritical. It's as if a smoker's advice to never smoke is somehow not valid because they are themselves a smoker. Nope, the advice is still valid, and to try to invalidate the advice is a mistake of logic. Same thing with a person who cheated on their spouse giving marital advice. It doesn't mean the advice is bad. The person may be, but that's a different story. This is an easy one. If you can get someone angry, then perhaps they won't notice you don't have any logic behind the argument, and you can get them to act. It's how mobs work, by the way. Appeal to how upset people are about topic A, and then link topic B, and suddenly people will be angry with topic B as well. It's ridiculous logical fallacy. This logical fallacy has been working on you since you were a kid. Whatever your parents said was the truth. They were the absolute source of knowledge on everything, and we never really outgrew that. Studies even show that people who wear white lab coats are more believable when asking strangers for money or for compliance. So if you can get a supposed expert to weigh in on whatever you want people to believe, or set yourself up as some sort of expert, then you are more likely to get people to believe you, even if that expert is not an expert in that field. Honestly, just because someone is a doctor, a scientist, or whatever, does not make them an expert in what you're talking about, or even what they're talking about. Check this every time someone says, well, so-and-so said this, and they're an expert. Check their expertise. And this logical fallacy is the reason the ASPCA makes money and why you probably turn off that commercial late at night. You're probably listening to the song in your head right now. You all know the one, in the arms of an angel. Okay, I'm going to quit. The reason they do it is because it works. Show me a picture of something sad and pathetic and you can talk people into something or out of their money. When you see an emotional appeal, heads up, it's using bad logic. Now, there are great reasons to donate to worthy causes, but looking at pictures of abused animals and making the viewer sad is not the best reason. But sadly, it's a profitable reason. Emotions don't just have to be sad. Beer companies use this logical fallacy to make drinking their product appear to make people happy. Wouldn't you say? This is a crazy one to come across. It basically says, we should be able to do something because, after all, we put a man on the moon, and this thing we want to do is less complicated than that. You know, just because a task is less complicated than putting someone on the moon, or any other complicated task, does not mean it's easy or even worthy of doing. It's saying, we can solve the problems of systemic racism. After all, we put a man on the moon. This is comparing two disparate things, after all. Don't fall for it. I run across this logical fallacy every time I go to a family reunion. Just because there's no evidence of something being false does not make it true, and vice versa. This is where we run up against the idea of science and understanding how science actually works. Things can be true or false because they haven't been proven false or true yet. The key is yet. That's what scientists work on, the proving of hypotheses. The scary thing is that people will make up something and present it as fact and then act on it without the data to back it up, often with terrible results. Think of the vaccine problem we have and the problem that created with children getting unnecessary diseases based on bad logic. And thanks to this logical fallacy, we get cults. Sometimes people take that idea that we talked about earlier, the idea of authority, and take it even a step further. It's like taking advice from a guy in a lab coat about what vitamins to take was just not enough. Now we want to let that same guy tell us how to invest in the stock market, or whom to date and marry. Sometimes people have so much faith in a person that they let that faith blind them to the limits of that person's authority. Perhaps a doctor does know about vitamins, but I would certainly not take their advice on dating. It's just too much authority to give to somebody without evidence of expertise in the dating arena. When this happens, you will have people believing in that person of authority can do no wrong, and then you'll get people eventually go into a sunk cost fallacy. We'll discuss that later. When they believe someone for so long that now they just can't not believe them. This one happens when you don't have a good argument to begin with. By stacking your end result on the premise of that result, you get a circle that just feeds itself. The cartoon has it exactly right. The key to success is hiring the right people, and you know you've hired the right people when you are successful. No way around it. The user of this kind of logic thinks they have an airtight case, but what they really have is no case. Just words to use in the hope that you won't notice their lack of logic. A vote for me is a vote for progress, and progress will only happen if you vote for me. You've probably heard that before. Now, this logical fallacy is when someone attempts to pick apart an argument you put forth because they don't have a solid argument on their own. It's like tasting flour and saying the cake will taste awful and powdery. It just doesn't work like that in reality. Or worse, try this one. Protest marchers had some people who rioted, so all protesters are rioters. See, it doesn't work like that. The parts do not make up the whole. And it also doesn't work the other way. Let's look at the cake again. A cake is delicious, but that doesn't mean I should go and take a big bite of flour thinking I'll have the same experience. In the same way, the protest marchers were peaceful, but it doesn't mean that all of the marchers had peaceful intentions. Some may not, but overall they did. People without a good argument, or people who just want to inflame their audience, will try this lack of logic on the weak-minded. Don't let it happen to you. Analogies are great at explaining complex ideas. However, taking an analogy and making it super simple and then putting it into another situation will get you false logic almost every time. When you look at the slide in the example, it's very clear the wolf is not a sheep, but it's harder to spot in real life. I've heard this one before. A watch is complex, and was obviously designed by an intelligent being. People are even more complex than watches, so they too must have been designed by an intelligent being. Now, regardless of where you stand on the issue of intelligent design or evolution, this is a terrible argument. Make the argument with real logic, not a logical fallacy. Watch out, pun intended, for people who try to make the analogy so simple that it applies to a vast majority of things. It's just too broad at that point. The world is not black and white, no matter how much we wish it were. When President Bush threw down this challenge back in 2001, he was hoping that the world leaders wouldn't catch the bad logic he was using, but they did. And we didn't have a huge coalition like he thought. Most leaders realized that there was a middle ground. Be careful anytime someone takes a complex argument and tries to make you think it's either A or Z, with nothing in between. Rarely in life is something cut and dried, not even murder. If even that most horrific of acts was so easy to judge, then we wouldn't have trials and juries. False dilemma is bad logic. Every time. And when you don't have time to think, just use a logical fallacy. This is the essence of a hasty generalization. It's the people that have just a teeny tiny bit of data or experience and then believe that all of that kind of thing will produce the same data or experience. My daughter once got the flu shot that year that she got the flu. By the way, flu shots are effective just 60% of the time, but help reduce the severity of the flu even if you get it. She doesn't believe the science. She believes that the flu shot caused her to get the flu. This was based on one experience. So she won't give her kids the flu shot now. She gives them all their other immunizations, just not the flu shot. Logical fallacies, here in my own family. I'm so ashamed. Now, this logical fallacy is a favorite one used by parents when they don't want to actually say no to their kids, but they also don't want their kids to do something. It goes like this. The teenager. Hey, Mom, can I go to Sam's house? Mom says, sure, when your room is clean. So the teen comes back when the room is clean, and then the mom adds, oh, and I meant to say the closet and your dresser too. So the teen rushes off, does that, the mom adds, oh, and the bathroom too. And on and on. You know what? That kid should just realize the answer was no all along and saved herself all that work. In arguments, it happens when someone thinks that a criteria can't be met. Then, when it is met, the person said, well, sorry, and so they said another criteria, and on and on and on. Please understand that someone who uses this kind of false logic will never actually stop moving the goalpost. They just don't want to admit that they don't have a case. In our example, with the teen going to Sam's house, Mom probably realized she didn't have a good reason to say no. She just kept putting in new goals. So don't fall for it. Now, this logical fallacy is used when the opponent doesn't have an answer for the proposed solution. Let's realize that there is no perfect solution that solves for every single case in the whole wide world. The bad logic believer wants you to think that there is a perfect solution and that somehow we should hold out for that solution and do nothing until that solution is there. Can you imagine using this kind of logic with thirst? If you were really thirsty and all you found was just a cup of water, would you refuse to drink it because it wasn't a gallon of water? Enough to quench any thirst? Or with the whole money for unemployment during a pandemic, how much is enough? 200, 400, 600? If it's not enough, should we fund any? Etc., etc., etc. This is just bad logic. Oh, this one is one of my favorites. It's like talking to a drunk person. By the way, non sequitur is Latin for this does not follow, and it is frequently used to mean, wait, what? That doesn't have anything to do with what you were talking about. But it doesn't translate as well. I like this cartoon. The whole idea of Groundhog Day is a non sequitur. Weather patterns are not at all related to furry mammal behavior on February 2nd. Not at all. Never have been, never will be. However, if the bad logic speaker can get you to not notice, then you might believe the connection. You have to really think, are the two connected? I know you'll find great examples of this one out in the real world. Oh my, this one can be used in a mean way. And it's a truth that you can't prove the negative. You just can't. But of course, people try to anyway. They try to say, well, without proof that it does not exist, then of course it does. When you say it out loud, it obviously sounds silly. Take this example. I believe that there is a teacup currently circling Mars, and until you prove it's not true, then we must go on the assumption that it is. Sounds silly, right? But what about religion? Now don't get me started. Let's understand something straight away. Religion is not a logic kind of thing. It's a faith thing. Without faith, it wouldn't be a religion anyway and wouldn't be as powerful as it is. And if you ever try to logic someone out of their religion, you're barking up the wrong tree. And on top of that, you're just mean. So if you can think of an example, not religion, where this might be offered as logic in a real-world argument, go for it. This one might be the one you're asked to find. Now, no one for the assignment gets to go looking for the slippery slope because it's everywhere. It is also a parent's top means of bad logic. You know the whole, Mom, can I go to Sam's house? And you get a, no, Sam lives on X street, and I saw on the news that there was something bad on that street. And if you go there, you'll start using drugs, and then soon I'll find you dead in your room of a heroin overdose. Wait, what? Exaggerate much? It sounds silly, but if you look at the cartoon on this slide, all of these were used before the Supreme Court in every one of these cases. It's terrible logic. When the other side really doesn't even have a good reason to oppose a law or an idea, they just use slippery slope logical fallacies, and they're all over the place. Watch out for them. By the way, you defeat the use of slippery slope by addressing each step of that slope, if you even want to engage such a weak-minded thinker. Oh, the straw man argument. When you don't have a good argument for what your opponent said, but you have a good argument for something entirely different, you now have a straw man argument. Keep an eye out for this one. You can get pulled off the original argument if you don't pay attention. The only way to fight against this kind of bad logic is to recognize it and agree to come back to their argument once you've settled your point. That usually stops them because, after all, they didn't have a good point to refute yours in the first place. Sometimes people just can't let go of an idea or a person or a project because, after all, they've held on to it for so long they just don't even know what life would look like without it. This is the sunk cost fallacy. It's hard to let go and admit defeat or admit it was a bad idea. Think of the people you've known who stayed in a bad relationship even when they knew it was bad, and the reason they gave you for that was, hey, I've already spent X amount of time. Might as well see it through. The truth they don't want to look at is what they're hiding from. They're using this fallacy. And finally, we have my family favorite, the anecdotal fallacy. This is your friend or your family member who knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a fact or had something happen to them, and then they base an entire argument on that experience. It's the opposite of science and logical thought. If something happens once, it's not a pattern or a truth, and if it can't be replicated, then it's just a cool story, bro, and nothing more. Don't take it for logic, and please call it out when you see it. That it's just a story, a valid story, but nothing more. So there you have it, some common logical fallacies explained a bit. Now go and read about your assignment and contact me if you have any questions.